Some truths don't scream. They whisper, through chromosomes, through blood, through the ancient instructions folded into every cell. After Ethan uncovered the subsonic pulse protocol and realized that millions were being silently reshaped, not by force, but by resonance, he couldn't return to his old life, not even in pretense. His reflection felt false, his heartbeat foreign, and every familiar street now hummed with an invisible frequency he could no longer unhear. But instinct told him that the pulse wasn't the beginning. It was only the conductor of a transformation already embedded in the flesh. He knew where he had to go. There was a biotech firm across the city, one of those sleek, ultra-modern labs built on a grant from nowhere, funded by no government, registered under a name that didn't appear in any database before 2022. It was called Vireon Systems, and it had recently purchased the rights to thousands of neonatal gene studies, including some Ethan remembered from his high school biology lectures, studies that were supposed to have been decommissioned after widespread ethical outcry. That night, under cover of an acid-gray sky and a silence that felt intentional, Ethan met Leah in the shadows outside the facility's back entrance. Her eyes, always strange, always luminous, looked heavier now, as if the more she remembered about herself, the more her human mask struggled to contain the weight of it. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Inside the lab, they moved with precision. Leah bypassed retinal scanners as if she had been expected. Ethan decoded a firewall by feeding it a strand of his own blood. And to his horror, the system accepted it. Within moments, they stood before a glass-encased server core, pulsing softly with an internal heartbeat. And within that server, the world's most protected genome database, the files had no names. Just long numerical sequences, each one tagged with anomalies, timestamps, and evolution markers. But buried within the logs was a keyword Leah had programmed the system to recognize: Anomaly B7, cross-epochic genome integration. And then, everything unraveled. Millions of entries, flagged, not in one country, not in one race. Across the planet, quiet, widespread genetic deviations appearing since 2003, with an exponential spike starting in 2016. They weren't mutations. They were insertions, clean, surgical, and utterly inhuman. Sequences that resembled no known virus, no ancient DNA, no evolutionary accident. These weren't evolutionary leftovers. They were instructions. They were blueprints. The affected subjects, ordinary people, parents, children, even newborns, had one thing in common: a neurological trait unobserved in natural human development. Ethan read the reports aloud, voice trembling, heart racing. Subjects exhibit synchronous emotional regulation, elevated spatial temporal processing, and hybrid limbic suppression. In other words, they didn't feel the same way anymore. Their emotional centers had been softened, regulated, sometimes erased. Their empathy increased, but their individuality decreased. They could think clearer, faster, but they no longer questioned why they thought at all. The data grew darker. Birth rates had dropped dramatically. But what had gone unnoticed was that among the declining birth rate, a new class of infant had emerged: Type L cohorts. Children who smiled within hours of birth. Children whose brain scans lit up in harmonic symmetry with frequencies like the one Ethan had recorded at 432. They didn't cry like other babies. They didn't dream like other babies. They were already attuned. Ethan backed away from the console. The weight of it hit him all at once. This wasn't a future possibility. This wasn't some alien threat waiting to descend from orbit. It had already happened. The human genome was no longer purely human. Earth was no longer purely Earth. And Leah, she was already part of the new architecture. She didn't deny it. Not anymore. She told him how she was born, not in a hospital, but in a compound buried beneath an unmarked mountain. Not raised but observed, trained, encouraged to blend, to simulate affection, to mirror fear, until one day it stopped being performance. Until she could feel what humans felt, but never the same way. She told him that she was the third in her line, the third Leah, each version more emotionally precise than the last. And Ethan realized, in a sick twist of irony, that his own blood had let them into the server, that he too carried those markers. That he was not discovering the truth. He was confirming it. He remembered the visions, the grid of light covering Earth, the pulses sensing minds, the warm feeling of belonging without struggle, and he finally understood. This wasn't war. It was absorption. Not all at once, but gradually, patiently. A better species wasn't invading. It was building itself from within the ruins of the old one. And humans were helping. They were calling it progress. Wellness, mental clarity, enhanced empathy, universal harmony. But what was being lost in return? Questioning, rebellion, art, wildness, madness, love that didn't make sense, grief that never healed. All the things that made being human feel unbearable and yet divine. Why me? Ethan whispered, not to Leah, but to whatever presence had designed this blueprint. She looked at him, her voice almost breaking. Because you're still fractured enough to choose. Then, from the deepest archive in the server, a final log surfaced. Undated. No author. Just 3 words. Integration. 91% complete. Ethan's body went cold. Not because he feared what came next, but because he realized what it meant. Humanity wasn't losing a battle. It had already surrendered and celebrated the surrender. The last 9%, they weren't survivors. They were anomalies. And Ethan was one of them. The server began to flicker. Their time was up. But the choice was still in front of him. Run, hide, or evolve. And outside the lab, in the cold neon light of the future, the pulse began again.